Thank you, everybody. And thank you for joining us for another session of Cyber Chats. Today, we have a distinguished guest with us, Kurt Hoeft of Easy IT. He's a CEO for them and in the managed service provider business. Hey, Kurt, why don't you go ahead and tell a little bit about your background, and we'll jump in and have a conversation here.
Sure. How about a little bit about Easy IT? That's the last 23 years of my background.
Okay.
We're a managed service provider based in Dublin, Ohio. There's 40 folk on staff these days. We provide support for approaching 7,000 endpoints across 15 states. We manage the IT for almost 50 companies. We do a lot of fully managed services, so the whole IT experience for smaller firms, typically sub 100 users, and a lot of co-managed IT for firms that are 100 user plus. We also provide dedicated network and security operations center services, NSOC services for our largest clients. So we take care of their patching and tool maintenance and their security stack, full-time monitoring service, that sort of thing. More or less, we are the run operations for IT for small and mid-sized businesses.
That's awesome. Well, look, thank you for joining us. We're really excited about having you. I know we had lunch probably over a month ago now where we talked about inviting you. And so really glad that you're here. And given your resume that you just shared with us with 7,000 endpoints, we feel like you're a great subject matter expert to talk with us a little bit in regards to, IT modernization, right?
Yeah.
There's lots of tech terminology or tech verbiage or tech bingo, whatever you want to call it, rolling around out there. Zero trust, collaboration, content management. I guess there's tons of places where we could start here, right? But a lot of times our clients have a lot of concern around ransomware and around threats. Talk to us a little bit about what you and your team has seen. And share a little bit with us about, I think when we were chatting a couple of days ago around some of the impacts around Microsoft 365 and other things that might be out there.
So many topics. Yeah,
right?
It's a moving target for sure. Never a dull moment, we like to say. When I look at what we did 2 years ago, let alone 3 years ago, it's so different than how we go to market now. We used to have, for instance, our offering used to be basic managed services, and then there were security add-ons, training for your people, phish testing, advanced threat protection, et cetera. And those were all additions. We don't do that anymore. Those all are table stakes. You have to have them. So we've gone ahead and evolved our service offerings for our clients to include those things. We also didn't used to get very much into policies and procedures. Now we provide those off the bat and we'll review them for our clients. They aren't on the level of what an auditing firm like you would do, but at least they're the basics in place. Things like cyber insurance. Cyber insurance didn't used to be really a thought for our clients. Now it's a mandatory part of every contract we sign. Our clients have to agree that they will have cyber insurance. It protects us, but more importantly, it's just an inexpensive, smart thing to do. If they're not willing to do that, they're probably not going to make many smart decisions.
Correct. So, it's a layered approach. Exactly.
Yeah, it goes and goes. So what we do now, what we see, it changes. The way we implement, you mentioned Office 365. Office 365 has been a boon and a hazard for most of our clients. Okay. We spent the last year and a half taking what were basic implementations of Office 365 and hardening those. We learned quickly at one point that a basic implementation of Office 365 is simply not secure. If someone wants to take over that instance, they can. They're just going to, there's no defending it. So there's minimum amounts of licensing you have to have. A lot of our clients are on Microsoft 365 Business Premium, which gives them things like P1 and advanced threat protection and a real spam filter, because the one that comes with it is not so great. Microsoft is saying, here's a car. Oh, you want an engine? That's extra.
Right. You want the transmission, you're going to have to pay a little bit more.
Right.
You can have the chassis. Hey, well, look, I just got word. It looks like Paul's going to join us.
Hey, Paul.
How are you?
Doing well. Good to see
I
you.
heard there was a party, so I couldn't stick out. I couldn't stay away.
That's awesome. Thanks for joining.
I'm going to turn the lights on in here. Holy cow.
Paul's trying to be a practitioner of the witness protection program. I guess to circle back a little bit is you talked with our attendees about hardening. We always want to try to make sure we talk about in a little bit plain. What do you mean by hardening?
Hardening. So if you're breaking into a house, are you going to break into the house that's got the Rottweiler behind the door? Or are you going to break into the house that's got the screen door that's unlatched? Right?
Right.
So there's lots of things you can do. A lot of them are free. And multi-factor authentication, for instance, in Office 365, it comes with every Office 365 offering. And not having it is a little indefensible because it's a little bit of annoyance for a whole lot of protection. And then to your point, a layered approach. So when you're an attacker, you have to compromise one endpoint. When you are defending, you have to compromise every endpoint. And so every endpoint needs protection on it. It needs protection in front of it. You need that person using the endpoint to have some level of education. Some level of healthy paranoia is good. Right. That's right. The best thing about simulated phish testing is, they don't want to be the person that gets added to that clickers group. They want to be wise.
And in our world, a lot of times, some of our peers will say that the end users are the weakest point. And, I don't know if I necessarily subscribe to that. I've had plenty of conversations with Paul around as well, too. And almost we can't keep using that as a crutch at some particular point. If they keep being the opportunity, then what are we missing as far as connecting the dots and helping them to get better? I believe that if we educate them, have that small sense of paranoia that you're talking about, they're likely to be a good sensor, right? And that there's no penalty if they make a mistake, that they speak up early and often versus, or if they see something that's fishy, see something, say something,
Right, and that's all. But you got to build that into your culture. You got to build that into your daily processes. Policies are something that are often overlooked. I mean, you're busy running your business. You don't want to have to write policies and preach policies, and you got stuff to ship. You got things to build. It's not your first priority, but the first time you have a security incident, suddenly it becomes your priority. Again, it's not always complicated stuff. We recently had a client that had a 8-figure wire transfer that was compromised, where they a man in the middle attack, it's called, got in the middle of their email stream, and was able to send a message that said, "Oh, we're at the same bank, but we've changed our deposit account. Here it is." And so at the last minute, it was a pre-scheduled transfer of funds. They wired it to the erroneous account.
Yeah.
I don't have information on exactly what the policy was or wasn't, and whether it was followed, but it seems like a phone call, verbal confirmation, should be the policy and should be followed to say, "Did you really change your deposit account for $1 million transaction?"
Right. Well, I think the problem is, right, is these people who commit these acts against the unknowing, right, or the unsuspecting, they catch it at a vulnerable moment because they've been in the middle and they've been sniffing and listening to those conversations. They might know that Paul is out of town and I'm the financial officer, or I'm the accounts payable person. And if I can make it seem believable and tie in some facts with some fiction and make you jump through the hula hoop that you normally wouldn't reason and do, that you'll bypass that process and do it because you think there's a sense of urgency.
You mean like that out of office, the CEO puts on their email so everyone in the world knows that they now need to go talk to somebody else to get that wire approved?
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah, little thing.
Or post it on their Facebook. Here I am in Hawaii.
Here I am in Hawaii.
Well, look, Kurt and Paul, you guys brought up some really good points there, right? About kind of disclosing information of where you are. We talked about some events here. one of the things is there's this idea out there that I don't need to improve my IT or my information security until I've had some form of an event happen. The idea that you just said around I wire transfers incorrectly, or I had that business email compromise. Let's kind of pivot and talk about that a little bit. I mean, what are your thoughts on waiting till to the negative event happens versus being proactive?
Well, that's sort of a leading question. So managed services is a fixed price business. Typically, you're going to provide a service for a fixed price each month. When a security event happens, it impacts the client, of course, but it also impacts my staff. I'll lose multiple senior engineers for hours to days responding to doing forensics, trying to figure out, was this real? How far did they get? Was anything else compromised? How long have they been in our systems potentially? I tend to view all of our clients on a spectrum somewhere between negligent to diligent, and negligence unacceptable. You got to do the basics, or we won't work with you because it puts my business at too much risk. I mean, we partner with our clients. We assume risk on their behalf. They have to do things that are wise, in order to have us as a partner. And when you look for a managed service provider, they need to be a partner, not a vendor. They need to care deeply that you're doing the right things, and doing the right thing changes as we've discussed.
Yeah.
How you set up backups is different than before. You can't have a backup on your domain anymore. That'll be the first thing that an intruder encrypts. Then they'll come after your data. And it's not like things change annually. They change week to week, month to month.
Threat actor to threat actor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hate to say it, but I think most business owners just don't get the industry that's out there coming after them. I mean, it is an industry. It's teams of people anywhere from organized crime syndicates, basically, that fill buildings that look like corporate headquarters, and all they're doing is trying to harvest money from companies and individuals, or even nation states. I mean, you're unlikely to be attacked by a nation state as a business unless you're, have some sort of Department of Defense secrets or something like that.
Right.
But when we talk about things like multi-million-dollar wire transfers, that's a long, drawn-out, detailed attack. They know what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. They've gone to the bank in advance. They've set up accounts. Everything's in place, and they're watching you and your business partners in that case, waiting for that moment when they can just slide something in and try to make that happen.
Yep.
It's scary, really, how much they care and how good they are at it.
Well, you mentioned something about partnership, right? That's one of the things that we love here at Ray is we look to be partners. We don't look to be vendors, and build this long-term relationship, specifically around helping your IT governance, your information security governance, whether that be through policy or practice and process. But another thing that I really kind of queued up that I heard you say was, is that you as an MSP, as a managed service provider, is at risk. I guess talk to the audience for us a little bit about what that means to you, how you make sure in that partnership you're strengthening that relationship, not only for the person who's your client, but also for your organization.
Yeah. So you bring up an ugly truth there. If you think that the end corporation, the end client is a big target, they're probably a much smaller target than the managed service provider. All managed service providers are targets. If you can compromise at that level, you've got an opportunity to then compromise every client they have. If you can get to where they store their credentials, if you can compromise their tools, kind of like when SolarWinds was compromised here recently, that one compromise affected thousands and thousands of organizations. And so if you were a cyber attacker, what a win that was. That was time well spent going for the linchpin for all the sub entities. So we are very aware of that. We spent a lot of time training and researching and keeping our network and security operations center diligent. As a business, we've decided to pursue and have attained SOC 2 compliance. So,
Okay.
SOC 2 being basically an audited credential that says you're a service organization, you have written policies, you have written procedures, they are followable, they are improvable. And by the way, if a third party like Ray would come in and they would audit, they could say, okay, show us how you terminated this employee that left. Prove that you locked them out of every system. Show us absolute documentation that what you say you're doing, you're actually reliably, consistently doing. I think that is going to become a standard in the industry. I will tell you that we're a business. My business partner is my brother, and he is all about process and procedures and lists and all the stuff that I'm really not about. I'm not a detail guy. And so he led the charge on this, and we're a better company for it. We have a ton of procedures. We have flow charts for how things happen, all this stuff. Worked with consultants for years now to evolve it and make it better. But in going through the SOC audit, we realized that having all these things exist wasn't very good. We had to actually have them organized, and we had to keep repetitively training on them, and we had to have a way to audit ourselves that people are consistently following all those procedures. And when we put that framework around it, we just feel better that we are doing the things that we have claimed to do all along on a very consistent basis. We're very different than a cyber practice CPA firm, right? As I mentioned, we're the run operations. If to put it in accounting terms, you guys are accountants, we would be the accounting department at the client, right?
Right.
You guys would be the auditor and the virtual, chief information security officer. So you come in and you say, okay, what are you doing? How are you doing it? Why aren't you doing this? Here's an opportunity to be better. You say you're doing this, but I don't see evidence that's actually occurring in this network. You'll write better policies, more compliant policies than we will. We're not compliance experts. We do the basics by default, and clients that have specific things, like we have clients that have ITAR data or Defense Department data. That's a very strict structured framework. We have to do things differently for them than we would for any other client. And we follow those things and we make those happen, but it's important that a third party comes in, like you all, and looks at that and can tell the client, your partner says they're doing these things, we can tell you they are, or they are not. Here's some deficiencies. That should bring a lot of peace of mind to that client. And importantly, these days, it brings peace of mind to their trading partners. Many of our clients now are, it's demanded that they show evidence of much more diligent things than they ever had to do before.
So, Kurt, you brought up some really good things. Our SOC 2 expert has joined us, and he's been a little quiet, but SOC 2 is one of his areas of focus for us as well, too. But then you also talked about ITAR and Department of Defense, right, which is something both he and I are very passionate and focused on, too, around the cybersecurity maturity model certification for those organizations doing business in the DoD. But before I get on my CMMC high horse, I mean, well, how do you feel about that SOC 2, for an MSP that's gone through a SOC 2 attestation? What's the value there for those folks who are looking to be partners or looking for their services?
So I look at this kind of in two ways, and I think it's a great question. So the first one is, it is a process that is intensive to go through. For some folks, it's more intensive than others. It gets easier as you go along, but the workload stays consistent because you're committing to some continuous controls and improvement in your environment. But it's something that it's available for you to share with your prospects. That is a clear indication of your commitment to their safety, to their data, to their services, to their business model. because you are enforcing the same thing that you're asking them to do on yourself. So there is a massive benefit in that communication to your prospects. Secondarily, in any type of due diligence types of arrangements where you work with somebody and they've got a ton of questions about you, this just saves all that time, right? We went through this entire effort with a firm. Here's a report, right? And since it's signed by a CPA, audited by a CPA, it carries the trust of that CPA brand. It just goes a long way in kind of answering all those questions up front. That's book world, okay? Real world for me is that an organization that is kind of operating in that managed security space is one of three necessary parties in an arrangement. Just like in finance, we have the people that do our books, and we have the people that operate the books, and we have the business, right? IT is the only other thing right now that touches as much, or not more, of the business as your financial position does. There isn't a business that you can look at, even the landscaper who wants paid for cutting the grass, that doesn't rely on technology to have it done. Yeah. And so take that complexity upstream to the bank that's processing the payment for the landscaper that wants paid for the grass that gets done. And there may be 10 or 15 different entities that get touched in that simple payment, right? The MSP a lot of times is a part of keeping that infrastructure up for one of those clients, if not the bank in some instances. So Kurt, you may have some clients that are banks. And there you go. And so part of that infrastructure means that you are committing to maintaining that safety and security around that infrastructure across the most frequent, comprehensive, and often touched part of the business. Period, bar none, full stop. The second is we're managing the only portion of a business that, if compromised, can end your business in about 10 seconds. Full stop, period, no further explanation, right?
Yep.
So even the worst financial collusion event takes months to uncover, and the business kind of slowly dies over it if they can't fix it. Everybody on this phone call knows one person clicks on an email, an action they do 10,000 times a day, and it can, in the matter of seconds, shut you out of your entire network, right? And then require payment to get it back, right? We know what ransomware is. So anyways, that SOC 2, I think, is really indicative and becoming necessary in a world where we have three parties. We have the business, we have the folks running IT, and we have this independent validation that says everybody's doing the right thing. And also everybody knows what the right things are. Right. So the customer knows what they ought to be doing. And frankly, I guess I did, just kind of off the top of my head right now, inside a SOC 2 report, there is a section that is user entity considerations or end user controls, right? Client considerations. So we can go through and we can do a SOC 2 over Easy IT, and Easy IT is going to have a section in there that says, in order for this report to be true, the client must be doing X. The client's got to tell us when to add a user. The client authorizes new users. The client authorizes changes in firewall settings. And so it puts the client or the reader of that SOC 2 on notice that they're a part of this ecosystem that makes things work. And so I think the SOC 2 solves several problems when you go through it. It is intensive, but at the end of the day, I think those three things make it worthwhile.
I tend to believe that we're really sort of seeing the tip of the iceberg too. So our financial institutions that we support, they've got SOC 1 compliance needs, which means their partners need to be compliant. In our case, SOC 2 compliant, not to get into the differences or anything there. It's not a common thing in our industry. It will be. I think more people are going to, even in the client realm, start to understand things like a NIST framework. They're going to understand more fundamentals than what they want to,
right.
by sheer necessity. I think SOC will become a standard for managed service providers, anyone that's in that critical linchpin space for businesses. Right. Just like the government's forcing with DoD suppliers with their capability maturity model. It has to be measurable, reportable, and provable. And frankly, if you're mature at what you do, it is. And to your point, Paul, it's not that heavy a lift after you got through that first phase of it, after the type 1.
So that brings up a couple good things. You answered a question that someone asked around should my MSP have a SOC 2? And so you went through that explanation a little bit. Great. So I didn't have to ask that question. But another question that came in was around why should I implement multi-factor authentication? And more importantly, they did a follow-up question: is receiving the text code okay?
Yeah, so any multi-factor is better than none. They're all, but that's sort of an astute observation. They're not all created equally. It is not a big deal anymore to brute force someone's password, and it's pretty easy to figure out. You could guess what my login credentials are for my network. You could guess what Ty's or Paul's are. Once you have that credential, and usually it's the same as someone's email address, you can then absolutely force their password. But if it forces a prompt to your phone or forces you to receive a text, that gives you a chance to say, uh-oh, this is happening or not happening. I didn't do this.
Right.
I talked to a prospect client today who used a product called Duo for two-factor authentication. And just out of the blue, one of his users said, I got a prompt in Duo, and I wasn't even on my computer. And they realized someone they actually had approved it. And they're like, I don't think I should have done that. Well, that was the person authenticating into their VPN. So they had a rogue person on their production network. He figures for 20 or 25 minutes. And he just shut down VPN access globally until he could figure out how that person got in there. It's just highly effective, and it's fairly cheap. I don't like email confirmation. It's compromisable. Text confirmation is effective. But like for Office 365, Microsoft will give you a free app on your phone, and it can even give you a push prompt that said, are you trying to authenticate? Yes or no. So it's very little burden, and it's very effective.
Yeah.
And there's no real overhead to it. It's a free product. And so, take advantage of those things.
Definitely. Well, look, we're a couple minutes out. I'm not sure if we missed anything in here. I think we hit on the different type of services and the SOC IT modernization. One of the things I wanted to bring up in this is, you hear a lot around, and to close us out, you hear a lot because of this remote workforce now, because of COVID-19 forcing a lot of organizations to implement a remote workforce in order to stay viable. You're now hearing not only from people in our circle, but even our president talk about as far as infrastructure, we need to implement some form of zero trust.
Correct.
You want to talk a little bit about that? I mean, there's no subject matter expert here because, that journey is still a new one for a lot of folks. But, what does that really mean?
Yeah, so zero trust. That means you basically whitelist everything that operates on your network. I feel like most companies are on a journey there. As you can imagine, there are so many applications, so many things, and they change, they get patched, they do this. You have to allow for that in order to manage a zero trust network. But if someone tries to inject something in your network, or there's traffic that shouldn't be there, it won't let it propagate. So zero trust won't stop you from having an event, but it should greatly contain the ability for it to spread. That's the promise of zero trust. Yeah. And I think zero trust is the future for financial institutions, and it's certainly there for the larger ones now. And it's going to kind of work its way down through the criticality of business.
I think it's going to have a definite impact on the defense industrial base, and that includes small businesses as well. Yep. So you can see that coming on the swing here in the next few years. Well, Kurt, look, it's been a pleasure having you here. I'd love for you to give us a quick sales pitch for Easy IT, if you're okay with that. It's always an honor to have such a knowledgeable guest and a trustworthy member of the cyber and IT community helping out our folks in business.
Yeah, so if you're a business owner, business manager, and you're curious about what your options are, feel free to reach out. And managed services aren't always the answer for every business, but I think there's a good opportunity to have an educational discussion, whether it's with Easy IT or one of our more mature competitors, I think it's a great opportunity for you to learn what maybe have thoughts that you didn't have before about how to manage your business and where risk might be. Take advantage of that. It's out there. People like me love to talk about this boring stuff.
That's right.
My email is just simply kurt@easyit.com. If anyone has a question at all, just reach out to me or hit me up on LinkedIn.
Well, nice job, Kurt. Paul, thanks for joining us as well. Everybody, thanks for joining us for another episode of Cyber Chats with Ray. Look forward to having you join us again in a month. Talk to everyone soon.
Thanks, Ty. That was fun. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.